"You spoiled little brats don't deserve anything." The scream shattered the morning calm of the Westbrook estate like breaking crystal. Victoria's voice ricocheted off marble walls, sharp enough to draw blood. 6-year-old twins Ella and Noah pressed themselves into the corner behind the gray velvet sofa, their small bodies trembling, faces streaked with tears they'd learned to cry silently. Daniel Westbrook froze at the hallway corner, his janitor's coveralls suddenly feeling like a costume in a play he no longer understood. His wife, the woman he'd married just 3 months ago, stood in the foyer with her back to him, designer heels clicking against Italian marble as she advanced toward his children. "I said get out here." Victoria's manicured hand reached toward the sofa. "That's enough." The voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. Elena Rivera stepped between Victoria and the children, one hand raised in a stopping gesture. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her stance was unmovable. Victoria's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing with dangerous precision. "Excuse me." "I said that's enough," Elena repeated, softer now but no less firm. The twins scrambled from behind the sofa and attached themselves to Elena's legs like she was their only anchor in a storm. Their small hands gripped her uniform with desperate strength. "You're fired." Victoria's voice dripped with venom. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Elena's expression remained calm, almost gentle, even as the children buried their faces against her. "You don't have the authority to fire me, Mrs. Westbrook. Mr. Westbrook hired me directly, and only he can terminate my employment. I'll stay until I hear from him personally." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might give him away. This woman, this stranger he'd hired 6 months ago, was standing up to his wife while he hid in a janitor's uniform like a coward. But Elena didn't know the truth. She had no idea that the man she was protecting was watching from the shadows, that her defiance had just revealed everything he'd been too blind to see. And she definitely didn't know that her courage in this single moment was about to shatter 3 lives in ways none of them could have imagined. To understand how Daniel Westbrook ended up disguised as a janitor in his own mansion, watching his world crumble from the shadows, we have to go back 3 weeks, to the day an anonymous email arrived and changed everything. But before we get into that, here's a special shout-out to Sophia Pambaker watching from Italy. Thank you for being one of our amazing supporters and engaging with the channel. A character in the story was named in your honor. If you'd also like to get a shout-out in the next video, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, and you'll be given a shout-out. Thank you. Now let's get into the story. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel Westbrook stood in his home office overlooking Lake Washington, staring at a family photo he could barely recognize anymore. 2 years had passed since Caroline's death, and the man in that picture, smiling, present, whole, felt like a stranger. "Mr. Westbrook?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Tokyo investors are online too. Tell them I'll call back," Daniel said, his eyes still fixed on the photograph, on Ella and Noah's faces when their mother was alive. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen them smile like that. The truth was brutal and simple. He'd abandoned his children to their grief while he drowned in his own. Westbrook development demanded 18-hour days, and he'd let it consume him because work was easier than facing 2 6-year-olds who looked at him with their mother's eyes. The nannies changed every few months. The therapists gave him reports he barely read, and his children had slowly, quietly, stopped being children at all. 6 months ago, everything had seemed to shift. Daniel remembered the charity gala at the Four Seasons where he'd met Victoria Ashford. She'd been magnetic, poised, sophisticated, with an easy laugh that made him feel human again for the first time in years. When she'd asked about his children, she'd actually listened to his answer. "They must miss having a mother," she'd said, her hand gentle on his arm. "Children need that stability, that feminine presence in their lives." Within weeks, she was visiting the estate. Within months, she'd moved in. And 3 months ago, in a private ceremony overlooking Puget Sound, Daniel had married her, believing he was giving his children the family they deserved. For the first time since Caroline's death, Daniel had felt hope. He'd been so sure he was doing the right thing. The twins seemed brighter, more animated. Victoria spoke about enrolling them in better schools, about family trips to Europe, about all the things a real family would do together. Daniel had been grateful, relieved, blind. Then, 2 days ago, an email arrived. No sender name, no signature, just a subject line that made his blood run cold. You need to see who your wife really is. Daniel had almost deleted it. Corporate espionage, blackmail attempts, hacking schemes, he dealt with these regularly. But something made him click. The message contained 4 photographs, all taken inside his own home. Timestamps from the past 2 weeks. The first showed Victoria in the twins' playroom, her face twisted with an expression Daniel had never seen. Cold, contemptuous. The second captured Ella holding a drawing, tears streaming down her face, while Victoria stood over her with crossed arms. The third showed Noah sitting alone at the kitchen table, his dinner untouched, while Victoria laughed on her phone in the background. The fourth was the worst. Both children huddled together in a corner, their body language screaming fear, while Victoria's shadow loomed large across the wall. The email's final line read, "This is what happens when you're not home. How much do you really know about the woman you marry?" Daniel's hands had shaken so badly he'd nearly dropped his phone. He'd immediately checked with his head of security about the house cameras. "Sir, Mrs. Westbrook requested we deactivate the indoor cameras last month. Said she felt uncomfortable being recorded in her own home. You approved it." He had. He'd signed off without thinking twice because Victoria's comfort had seemed more important than surveillance in his own house. Now someone else had cameras inside his home. Someone was watching his family. Someone wanted him to see what he'd been missing. Daniel had spent the next 24 hours trying to rationalize it. The photos could be taken out of context. The angles could be misleading. Victoria wouldn't. She couldn't. But he couldn't shake the memory of how the twins had looked in those images. He'd seen that particular kind of fear before, years ago, when he'd volunteered at a children's shelter in college. That was the posture of children who'd learned to make themselves invisible. He'd tried asking the twins directly, "Are you happy? Is everything okay at home?" They'd nodded silently, their faces carefully blank. Rehearsed. That's when Daniel knew he had to do something drastic. "I'm going undercover," he'd told his head of security, Marcus Chun, the only person he trusted completely. "In my own house." "Sir, that's insane." "I know." Daniel had paced his office, mind racing. "But whoever sent those photos is right. I don't know what's happening in my own home. I don't know who my wife really is. And my children." His voice cracked. "Marcus, they're afraid of something. Someone. I need to see the truth." They'd spent 2 days planning. Daniel would take a supposed business trip to Singapore, 2 weeks minimum, possibly extending to a month. Meanwhile, he'd returned to Seattle under a false identity, hired through Marcus's network as Pete Morrison, a temporary maintenance worker. Now, standing at the service entrance of his own mansion at 6 a.m., Daniel barely recognized himself in the reflection of the glass door. Worn work clothes replaced his tailored suits. A baseball cap covered his distinctive hair. Glasses he didn't need. Posture deliberately hunched. He pressed the buzzer. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, answered. She was one of 3 people who knew the truth. Marcus had briefed her personally. Her face remained professionally neutral as she looked Daniel up and down. "You must be Pete. Come in. We'll get you started on the maintenance schedule." Daniel stepped through the threshold into his own $50 million estate as a stranger, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He had no idea what he was about to discover. No idea that the woman he'd hired to care for his children would become the center of everything. No idea that 3 weeks from now, he'd be watching his world implode from the shadows of a hallway. All he knew was that his children needed him to see the truth, whatever it cost. Have you ever felt like you didn't recognize your own life anymore? Like the person you trusted most might be hiding something that could shatter everything? What would you do if you received those anonymous warnings? Would you investigate, or would you ignore them and hope for the best? Let me know in the comments, because Daniel Westbrook's decision to walk through that service door was about to change everything. Daniel's first week as Pete Morrison was an education in invisibility. He'd spent his entire adult life commanding boardrooms, closing billion-dollar deals, having assistants anticipate his every need. Now he scrubbed floors, unclogged drains, and learned that when you wore a maintenance uniform, people looked right through you. It was exactly what he needed. "Pete, can you handle the upstairs bathrooms today?" Mrs. Chin asked on his 3rd morning, her voice carefully neutral. "The family wing needs attention." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, keeping his voice lower than usual, his posture bent. "The family wing. where his children lived, where Victoria ruled in his absence. He worked slowly, methodically, ears attuned to every sound. Voices carried differently when you were invisible. Conversations happened around you as if you weren't there. "Did you see what Mrs. Westbrook did yesterday?" one of the housekeepers whispered to another near the linen closet. Threw out all of Miss Ella's stuffed animals. Said they were making the room look cluttered. All of them. Every single one. The little girl cried for hours. Daniel's hands froze on the bathroom tile he was scrubbing. Caroline had given Ella those stuffed animals. Each one had a story, a memory. "Well, it's not our place to say anything," the first housekeeper sighed. "Mrs. Westbrook runs the house now." They moved away, leaving Daniel alone with rising fury and the sick realization that the anonymous photos had only shown him a fraction of the truth. That evening, around 8 p.m., Daniel found himself organizing supplies in the hallway closet near the twins' bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and he heard something that made him stop breathing. Laughter. Real, genuine, unrestrained children's laughter. He peered through the gap. Elena Rivera sat cross-legged on the floor between Ella and Noah's beds, a picture book open in her lap. She was doing voices, a ridiculous, exaggerated dragon voice that had both children giggling so hard they could barely breathe. And then the dragon said. Elena growled comically, "Who ate all my cookies?" It was the princess. Ella squealed, her face bright with joy Daniel hadn't seen in years. "No way," Noah gasped between laughs. It was the night. He was hungry. "Well, there's only one way to find out," Elena said, turning the page with theatrical slowness. "We have to keep reading." Both children leaned forward eagerly, their eyes shining. This was what childhood was supposed to look like. This was what Daniel had been desperately trying to give them by marrying Victoria. But it wasn't Victoria creating this moment. It was a housekeeper he'd hired 6 months ago and barely remembered meeting. "What's going on here?" Victoria's voice cut through the room like winter frost. Daniel watched Elena's expression shift, professional, guarded, while the twins' faces shut down instantly. The light in their eyes extinguished as if someone had flipped a switch. "Just finishing bedtime stories, Mrs. Westbrook," Elena said calmly, standing up. The children requested one more chapter. "It's past their bedtime." Victoria's tone was clipped, controlled. "They need structure, not indulgence. You can go." "Of course." Elena bent down to the twins. "We'll find out what happens to the dragon tomorrow, okay?" They nodded silently, no longer smiling. As Elena passed Victoria in the doorway, Daniel noticed the subtle tension in both women's shoulders. This wasn't the first time they'd had this interaction. "Now," Victoria said, her voice softening artificially, "let's get you two settled. Tomorrow we have etiquette lessons, remember? We need you looking presentable." Ella was 6 years old. Noah was 6 years old. They didn't need etiquette lessons. They needed to laugh at dragon voices and fall asleep happy. Daniel backed away from the closet before Victoria spotted him, his mind reeling. Over the next week, he watched more carefully. The patterns emerged like invisible ink under heat. In the garden one afternoon, while trimming hedges near the rose beds, Daniel observed Elena kneeling in the dirt with both twins. She was teaching them about plants, her voice gentle and patient. "This one is lavender," she said, letting Ella touch the purple blooms. "Smell it. What does it remind you of?" "Mommy's closet," Ella whispered, so quietly Daniel almost missed it. "Mommy used to smell like this." Elena's hands stilled on the plant, and her expression softened with understanding. "Then we'll make sure there's always lavender in this garden, okay? So you can remember her whenever you want." "Really?" Noah asked, his voice small and hopeful. "Really? Your mother loved you both so much. These flowers can be like little messages from her, reminding you that love doesn't disappear just because someone's not here anymore." "Ellie," Ella said, using the nickname that made Elena smile. "Do you think Mommy would like you?" "I think," Elena said carefully, "your mommy would want you to have people in your life who care about you. And I do care about you. Both of you. Very much." The twins moved closer to her, and Elena wrapped an arm around each of them, the three of them sitting in the dirt among the flowers like a scene from a painting. Daniel's throat constricted. This stranger understood his children better than he did. She'd found a way to honor Caroline's memory while helping them heal, something he'd been too broken to do himself. "There you are." Victoria's voice carried across the garden, sharp and irritated. "Look at you, covered in dirt like common children. Go inside and clean up immediately. Elena, they have piano practice in 10 minutes. I expect them presentable. The light died in his children's faces again. They stood mechanically, brushing dirt from their clothes, and walked toward the house with hunched shoulders. Elena remained kneeling in the garden, her head bowed, hands clenched in the soil. That night, while organizing cleaning supplies in the utility room around 11 p.m., Daniel spotted Elena through the window. She sat alone on a stone bench in the garden, her posture radiating exhaustion and something deeper. Sadness. Loneliness. She was young, maybe late 20s, and obviously cared deeply about her work, about his children. But there was a weight to her solitude that spoke of her own losses, her own grief. Daniel realized he knew nothing about the woman his children had chosen to trust. Nothing about who she was, where she came from, why she'd taken a job as a housekeeper when she clearly had the intelligence and compassion for so much more. He needed to know, because something was building in his chest that terrified him. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Something that made him want to walk out into that garden and sit beside her and ask her story. If you're getting invested in this story, hit that subscribe button. Because what Daniel was about to discover about Elena would complicate everything in ways he couldn't imagine, and I need to know you'll be here for what comes next. Stories like this take time to unfold, and I can't tell this story to an empty room. So subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Daniel finally talks to the woman his children call Ellie. The morning of week 3 started like any other. Daniel was polishing the marble in the front hallway when Victoria's scream shattered the air like breaking glass. "You spoiled little brats don't deserve anything." His head snapped up. Through the archway, he could see Victoria towering over the twins, who were pressed into the corner behind the gray velvet sofa. Ella's face was wet with silent tears. Noah's small body trembled. Daniel's muscles coiled, ready to drop his cover and intervene when Elena appeared. She moved quickly but calmly, positioning herself between Victoria and the children without hesitation. Her hand rose in a stopping gesture, steady despite the slight tremor in her fingers. "That's enough," Elena said quietly. Victoria's head whipped toward her, eyes blazing. "Excuse me. I said that's enough." Elena's voice remained soft but carried absolute authority. The twins immediately scrambled from behind the sofa and attached themselves to Elena's legs, their small hands gripping her uniform like lifelines. "You're fired." Victoria's words were ice-cold, precise. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Daniel held his breath, waiting for Elena to back down, to apologize, to submit the way employees usually did when threatened by someone with power. Instead, Elena's expression remained calm, almost gentle. "You don't have the authority to fire me, Mrs. Westbrook. Mr. Westbrook hired me directly, and only he can terminate my employment. I'll stay until I hear from him personally." The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria's face flushed red, her jaw clenching with barely contained fury. But Elena didn't flinch, didn't waver, even with 2 terrified children clinging to her and a billionaire's wife staring her down. "We'll see about that," Victoria hissed. "When my husband returns, we'll see who stays and who goes." She turned on her heel and stormed toward the stairs, the sound of her designer heels against marble echoing like gunshots. Elena immediately knelt down to the twins' level. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere, I promise." From his position in the hallway, Daniel watched this stranger comfort his children with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Elena smoothed Ella's hair, wiped Noah's tears, whispered something that made them both nod. And in that moment, Daniel saw everything with devastating clarity. The anonymous photos hadn't lied. Victoria's mask had slipped completely. And this woman, this housekeeper he barely knew, had just risked her livelihood to protect his children. He had to know who she was. That evening, Daniel found Elena in the garden around 9 p.m., tending to the roses under the soft glow of landscape lighting. Her movements were methodical but distracted, and even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Evening," he said carefully, his voice still pitched lower as Pete. "Mind if I work on the irrigation system nearby?" Elena glanced up, startled, then offered a small smile. "Of course. The garden belongs to everyone." Daniel busied himself with a sprinkler head that didn't actually need fixing, working up the courage to speak. "That was brave this morning. What you did." her hands stilled on the roses. You saw that? Hard not to hear it from the hallway. He kept his eyes on his work. Not many people would stand up to someone like Mrs. Westbrook. Those children needed someone to stand up for them. Elena's voice was quiet but firm. They're 6 years old. They deserve to feel safe in their own home. You could have lost your job. Some things are more important than a job. She moved to the next rose bush, deadheading spent blooms with practiced care. Besides, she can't fire me. Not legally, anyway. Daniel risked a glance at her. You knew that when you stood up to her? I hoped. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I figured Mr. Westbrook wouldn't hire someone just to have his wife replace them on a whim. Either I was right, or I'd be packing tonight. Worth the risk. For 2 kids you've known for 6 months? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Those 2 kids have lost their mother. They're drowning in grief, and the adults around them are too busy or too. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Too focused on other things to see it. Someone needs to see them. Really see them. Daniel's throat constricted. She was right. He'd been too focused on work, on his own grief, on finding a quick fix through remarriage. He hadn't truly seen his children in 2 years. You're good with them, he said. Ella and Noah. They light up around you. They're incredible kids. Elena's voice softened with genuine affection. Smart, creative, so much potential. They just need someone who shows up consistently. Who's present. Children don't need perfection or grand gestures. They need presence more than presence. The phrase hit Daniel like a physical blow. How many presents had he sent from business trips? How many expensive toys had he bought to compensate for missed bedtimes, missed school events, missed moments? That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way, Daniel said carefully. Elena's hands stilled again. I came to America years ago. Left everything behind. I've learned that what we lose teaches us what really matters. And what matters isn't money or status or impressive houses. It's showing up, being there, making someone feel like they matter. What made you come to America? Daniel asked, genuinely curious now. Family reasons. Elena's tone closed slightly, a door gently shutting. Long story, ancient history, but her voice carried a weight that said it wasn't ancient at all, that whatever had brought her here still hurt. Do you have family here now? Daniel pressed gently. No. The word was quiet, almost lost in the evening breeze. I'm alone, but working with Ella and Noah, it helps. Reminds me why I'm here. Daniel watched her profile in the dim light, seeing the sadness she tried to hide. You said you understand loss. Did you lose someone? Elena's hand rose to her face, and Daniel realized she was wiping away tears she didn't want him to see. I lost someone very important to me. Someone I'm still looking for, in a way. But her voice cracked slightly. That's not something I talk about. I'm sorry, Daniel said softly. I didn't mean to pry. It's okay. She took a steadying breath. Sometimes grief follows us longer than we expect. We just learn to carry it differently. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people carrying different losses, connected by the 2 children sleeping upstairs. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, an awareness, a connection he hadn't expected. This woman understood pain. She'd lost something precious, come to a foreign country alone, and somehow found purpose in caring for 2 grieving children who weren't even hers. For what it's worth, Daniel said, those kids are lucky to have you. Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both broken people trying to protect something precious. Thank you, Pete, she said softly. That means more than you know. Daniel returned to his quarters that night knowing everything had changed. His mission to uncover Victoria's true nature was complete. He'd seen enough. But now there was Elena. Brave, compassionate, wounded Elena, who'd risked everything for his children and was now in Victoria's crosshairs because of it. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks, without meaning to, without planning it, Daniel had started falling for the woman his children had already chosen. Elena just stood up to a billionaire's wife to protect those kids, knowing she could lose everything. Would you have had that courage? When was the last time you risked everything for what was right, even when the cost could have been devastating? Drop your story below, because I think we all need reminders that courage sometimes looks like a quiet woman standing between cruelty and innocence, refusing to move. The days following the confrontation were thick with tension. Victoria treated Elena with icy hostility, clipped words, cold stares, deliberately impossible tasks assigned with surgical precision. But she couldn't fire her, and that reality burned in every interaction. "The silver needs polishing," Victoria would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "All of it. By tonight." "Of course, Mrs. Westbrook," Elena would reply, her tone professionally neutral. Daniel watched these exchanges from the shadows, jaw clenched, fists tight around whatever cleaning tool he was holding. Victoria was retaliating the only way she could, through petty cruelty and power plays that stopped just short of actionable harassment. But Elena never broke, never complained, never gave Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her rattled, and the twins stayed glued to her side whenever possible. They'd seek her out during breaks, hover near whatever room she was cleaning, invent reasons to need her help. It was as if they sensed she was in danger and were trying to protect her the only way 6-year-olds could, through constant presence. "Ellie, can you help me with my homework?" Ella would ask. "Ellie, I need help finding my toy," Noah would say 10 minutes later. Elena never turned them away. Even with Victoria's impossible task list, she always found time to kneel down, to listen, to make them feel seen. Daniel's garden conversations with Elena became routine over the next week. They never planned them, but somehow they'd both end up outside around the same time each evening, drawn by unspoken agreement to the one place in the estate that felt peaceful. They talked about everything and nothing: Seattle's unpredictable weather, the best coffee shops downtown, books they'd read, movies they'd loved. Surface conversations that slowly went deeper, like diverse acclimating to pressure as they descended. One night, about 10 days after the confrontation, Elena asked the question Daniel had been both dreading and hoping for. "Pete," she said, pruning shears paused mid-cut on a rose stem, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure," Daniel replied, adjusting a sprinkler head. "The twins' mother, Caroline. What was she like?" Daniel's hands stilled. He'd prepared for this question, had a vague answer ready about what he'd heard from staff. But looking at Elena's genuine curiosity, her obvious care for his children, he realized he couldn't lie to her anymore. "Not about this. I didn't know Caroline well," he said carefully, still maintaining his cover. "But I know the real story of how Mr. Westbrook became a father. And it's complicated." Elena set down her pruning shears, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." Daniel took a breath, the truth burning in his chest. "The twins aren't from his marriage to Caroline. They came later, about 6 months after she died." "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, Mr. Westbrook took a business trip to Brazil." Daniel kept his voice steady, even as the memory churned his stomach. "He met someone there. A woman. It was brief, just a few days, really. One of those unexpected connections that happen when you're far from home, both a little lost." Elena's expression shifted, something flickering across her face too quickly for Daniel to read. "He never got her name," Daniel continued. "Never got her contact information. It was just a moment. Then he came home, and life moved on. Until about 2 years ago, when someone left 2 babies on his doorstep with a note saying they were his." "Oh my God," Elena whispered. The note said their mother couldn't care for them. Didn't explain why, didn't leave any way to contact her. Just 2 infants and a desperate plea for him to take responsibility. Daniel's voice roughened with emotion he didn't have to fake. He did DNA testing immediately. They were his. Ella and Noah were his children from Brazil, and their mother had vanished completely. Did he try to find her? He tried everything. Hired investigators, searched hospitals and registries, tracked every lead back to Sao Paulo and Rio. Nothing. She'd disappeared like smoke. Daniel met Elena's eyes. He has one photograph of her. Just one. It's buried somewhere in his room because looking at it is too painful. Every time he sees it, he wonders who she was, why she left them, whether she thinks about them. Elena's face had gone pale, her hands gripping the edge of the stone bench. "One photograph," she repeated, her voice strange. "Blurry, taken from a distance. But it's all he has of the woman who gave him his children." Daniel's voice cracked authentically. "Those kids ask about their birth mothers sometimes, and he has no answers to give them. No stories, no explanations. Just a picture he can barely stand to look at, and 2 children who deserve so much more than what he's given them. That's why he married Victoria," Elena said quietly. "He wanted to give them a mother." "Yeah." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "That worked out great." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the confession settling between them. Daniel watched Elena's face, seeing emotions cascade across her features: shock, sympathy, and something else he couldn't identify. Something deeper, more personal. "That's incredibly sad," Elena finally said, her voice thick. "For him, for the children, for their mother, wherever she is." "You think she's sad about it?" Daniel couldn't help asking. "She's the one who left them. Maybe she had no choice." Elena stood abruptly, turning away from him. "Maybe there were circumstances he doesn't understand. Maybe leaving them was the hardest thing she ever did, and she spent every day since wondering if they're okay." The passion in her voice startled Daniel. This wasn't abstract sympathy. This was something raw and personal. "Elena, I should go." She was already backing toward the house, her composure fracturing. "I have an early morning tomorrow. Thank you for sharing that with me. It helps me understand the twins better." "Elena, wait." But she was gone, disappearing into the mansion before Daniel could finish his sentence. He sat alone in the garden, staring at the space where she'd been, replaying her reaction in his mind. The way her face had drained of color when he mentioned Brazil. The way her hands had trembled when he talked about the single photograph. The way she'd defended a woman she'd never met with fierce, personal conviction. Something wasn't right. Or maybe something was very, very right in a way Daniel couldn't yet understand. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Elena had run straight to her small room in the staff quarters, locked the door, and pulled out a photograph she kept hidden in her nightstand drawer. A photograph of a young woman on a Brazilian beach, dark hair blowing in the wind, a small crescent-shaped birthmark visible on her neck. A photograph of her sister Sophia, taken 4 years ago, 2 months before she disappeared. Elena stared at that photo until her tears blurred the image, whispering a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, wondering if the impossible could somehow be true. Would you have told her the truth? Or would you have kept that secret locked away, afraid of how it might change everything? Sometimes honesty plants seeds we don't even know we're planting, and they grow in the dark until they break through into the light. What do you think? Was Daniel right to trust Elena with his deepest secret? Let me know in the comments. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel was repairing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen when he heard the ripping sound from the dining room. Sharp, deliberate, accompanied by Victoria's voice dripping with disdain. "This is garbage. Absolute garbage." He moved to the doorway in time to see Victoria tearing apart a large drawing, crayon and marker on poster board, that Ella had been working on for days. The little girl stood frozen, watching her artwork destroyed piece by piece. "Art should be beautiful, Ella. This is just messy scribbles. You're better than this." Victoria dropped the torn pieces on the floor like trash. "Clean this up and try again. Maybe something less childish this time." She walked past Daniel without a glance, her heels clicking away down the hall. Ella stood motionless, staring at the scattered pieces of her drawing. Her face was blank, but her small hands were clenched into fists, and Daniel could see her fighting back tears with the practiced control of a child who'd learned that crying made things worse. He wanted to go to her, wanted to drop his disguise and scoop her into his arms and tell her that her art was beautiful, that she was beautiful, that her mother would have loved every messy, colorful, perfectly 6-year-old stroke. But before he could move, Elena appeared. She knelt beside Ella without a word, gathering the torn pieces carefully, treating each fragment like it was precious. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's take these to my room. I have an idea." An hour later, Daniel found an excuse to walk past Elena's door in the staff quarters. Through the gap, he could see Elena and both twins sitting on the floor, painstakingly taping the torn pieces of the drawing back together on a new piece of poster board. "See," Elena was saying, "now it's not just a drawing. It's a mosaic. It's art that was broken and made into something new. Something even more special because of what it survived. Like us." Noah asked quietly. Elena's hands stilled. "Yeah, honey. Like you. You've been through something hard, losing your mom. But you're still here, still creating, still beautiful. Just like this drawing." Ella leaned against Elena's shoulder. "Will you keep it safe? So Mrs. Victoria can't tear it again." "I'll keep it safe," Elena promised. "And when your dad comes home, we'll show him what you made. He's going to love it." Daniel had to walk away before they heard him crying. That night, around 2 a.m., Daniel was restocking supplies in the upstairs linen closet when he heard Ella scream. "Nightmare." He'd heard them before, both twins had them, but tonight's was particularly bad. He crept toward her room and watched through the cracked door as Elena appeared within seconds, somehow already awake and alert. She sat on the edge of Ella's bed, stroking her hair, whispering gentle reassurances. Then she began to sing. Softly, in Spanish, a lullaby Daniel didn't recognize, but that sounded ancient and beautiful. Her voice was surprisingly lovely, untrained but pure, filled with genuine tenderness. Ella's breathing slowly steadied. Her small body relaxed. By the second verse, she was asleep again, one hand clutching Elena's fingers. Elena stayed there for another 20 minutes, singing softly, making sure the nightmare didn't return. Daniel retreated before she could discover him watching, but the image burned itself into his brain. This woman, this stranger who owed his children nothing, was showing up for them in ways he'd failed to do, ways Victoria never had. The next morning, while cleaning the main office, Daniel overheard two staff members talking in the adjacent room. "Did you see the credit card statement Mrs. Chun accidentally left on the counter?" One whispered. "Mrs. Westbrook spent $40,000 last month." "On what?" "Clothes, jewelry, spa treatments. The usual. But there was a charge for $75,000 to some luxury travel company. She told Mr. Chun it was for a family trip she was planning." "A family trip she hasn't mentioned to the family?" "Exactly. And get this. I overheard her on the phone yesterday talking about renovating the West Wing. She wants to turn the children's playroom into a yoga studio. She said, and I quote, 'They're too old for all those toys anyway. Time to grow up.'" Daniel's blood went cold. The West Wing playroom had been Caroline's gift to the twins, a bright, colorful space filled with books and art supplies and imagination. It was one of the last pieces of their mother they had left. That afternoon, Victoria cornered Elena in the hallway outside the laundry room. Daniel was organizing the supply closet nearby, invisible as always. "I hope you're not getting too comfortable," Victoria said, her voice silk over steel. "When my husband returns, and he will return, we're going to have a very serious conversation about staffing decisions. I think we both know who he'll believe." "I'm not worried, Mrs. Westbrook," Elena replied calmly. "I'm good at my job, and Mr. Westbrook is a fair man." "Fair?" Victoria laughed coldly. "You think you know my husband? You've worked here 6 months. I'm his wife. I share his bed. I know exactly how to make him see things my way." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "When he returns, you'll be gone within a week. And those children will finally learn some discipline without you constantly coddling them. It's what's best for everyone." "Is it?" Elena's voice remained steady, but Daniel could hear the steel underneath. "Or is it what's best for you?" Victoria's face flushed with anger. "Watch yourself. You're not as untouchable as you think." She walked away, leaving Elena standing alone in the hallway. Daniel watched her take a slow, steadying breath, her hands trembling slightly before she clenched them into fists and got back to work. That night, Daniel sat in his small room in the staff quarters, staring at his phone, at the pictures of his children, at the life he'd been living from a distance while strangers, first Victoria, then Elena, shaped his kids' daily reality. And he realized something that terrified him. He was in love with Elena. Not the superficial attraction he'd felt for Victoria. Not gratitude for someone caring for his children. Real, deep, complicated love for a woman who was brave and kind and broken in ways that matched his own brokenness. A woman he was lying to every single day. A woman who worked for him, which made any relationship ethically complicated at best. A woman who was in danger because of Victoria's jealousy and his own cowardice in hiding. He thought about continuing the charade, about gathering more evidence, about waiting for the perfect moment. But the truth was simple. There was no perfect moment. And every day he waited was another day Elena faced Victoria's hostility alone. Another day his children lived in uncertainty. Another day he was a coward hiding in his own home. Daniel made his decision. Tomorrow night, in the garden where they'd had every meaningful conversation, he would tell Elena the truth. All of it. Who he really was, why he'd disguised himself, what he'd discovered about Victoria, and most terrifyingly, how he felt about her. The risks were enormous. She could be angry about the deception. She could feel manipulated, trapped by a power imbalance she hadn't known existed. She could quit and disappear from their lives entirely. But Daniel had spent 2 years making the safe choice, the comfortable choice, the choice that avoided confrontation and pain. And all it had done was hurt the people he loved most. It was time to risk everything for the truth. We're at a turning point now. If you want to see how this unfolds, subscribe. I promise you, what's coming next will change everything. Daniel is about to drop his disguise, reveal his heart, and risk losing everything for a woman who doesn't even know his real name. Don't miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to explode in ways you won't see coming. The next evening, Daniel waited in the garden with his heart trying to break through his ribs. He'd changed out of his maintenance uniform into clean jeans and a plain shirt, still not his usual designer clothes, but not Pete Morrison either. His hands shook as he rehearsed what he'd say for the 100th time. Elena appeared at 9 p.m., right on schedule, carrying her pruning shears. She stopped short when she saw him. "Pete, you look different. Are you okay? I need to talk to you." Daniel's voice came out rougher than intended. "And I need you to let me get through this before you say anything. Because if I stop, I don't think I'll have the courage to start again." Elena set down her shears slowly, concern crossing her face. "What's wrong?" "Everything. Nothing. I don't know anymore." Daniel took a shaky breath. "My name isn't Pete Morrison. It's Daniel. Daniel Westbrook." The color drained from Elena's face. "What? I'm not a maintenance worker. I own this estate. Those children upstairs, Ella and Noah, they're my children. And I've been lying to you for 3 weeks." Elena took a step back, her hand rising to her mouth. You're him? You're their father?" "I am." Daniel forced himself to meet her eyes. 3 weeks ago, I received an anonymous email with photos showing Victoria mistreating my kids. I didn't know what was real anymore, who to trust. So I staged a business trip and came back disguised as staff to see the truth for myself. You've been watching us. This whole time. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes. And I saw everything. I saw Victoria's cruelty. I saw how my children were afraid in their own home. I saw you destroy your own job security to protect 2 kids you barely knew." Daniel's voice cracked. "I saw you tape together torn artwork at 2 a.m. I heard you sing Spanish lullabies to chase away nightmares. I watched you give my children something I failed to give them for 2 years, someone who shows up." Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked about Victoria's threat. You were right. She can't fire you. She never could. And she never will. Because as of tomorrow, Victoria won't be living here anymore. I'm ending this marriage. I've seen enough." "Daniel, I'm not finished." He stepped closer, his hands shaking worse now. "I know this is insane. I know the power imbalance makes this complicated and maybe even wrong. I know I've been lying to you, and you have every right to be furious. But Elena, I can't keep this inside anymore." "Keep what inside?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out raw, terrified, completely honest. "I've been falling in love with you since that first night we talked about the roses. Maybe before that. Maybe from the moment I watched you stand up to Victoria and refuse to back down." Elena's breath caught audibly. We can't. I know all the reasons why this is impossible," Daniel continued, his voice breaking completely now. "You work for me. I lied to you. We've known each other less than a month. But Elena, I've spent 2 years sleepwalking through my life, and you woke me up. You showed me what my children need. You showed me what I've been missing. What courage looks like. What love looks like." "Stop," Elena whispered, but she didn't move away. "I need to know," Daniel said desperately. "Do you feel anything for me? Even a fraction of what I feel for you? Because if there's even a chance." "Daniel, you don't understand." "Then help me understand. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me I haven't completely destroyed this by being honest." He reached out but stopped short of touching her, respecting the space between them. "I know I'm asking too much. I know this is unfair. But I couldn't keep lying to you. Not about who I am. Not about how I feel." Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in shaky gasps. Her mouth opened and closed several times, words forming and dying before they could become sound. "You don't have to answer now," Daniel said quietly, seeing her struggle. "I don't expect you to have this figured out when I just blew up your entire understanding of the last 3 weeks. Take time. Process this. I'm not going anywhere. Elena's voice broke. "I need to think. This is too much. You're too much. I can't. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dumped all of this on you at once." Daniel stepped back, giving her space. Just think about it. Please. And know that whatever you decide, your job is safe. The kids adore you. You're not losing that no matter what happens between us. Between us, Elena repeated, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. There is no us. You're a billionaire. I'm your housekeeper. You're married. I'm ending my marriage tomorrow, Daniel interrupted gently. And I don't care about money or status or what anyone thinks. I care about you. I care about being honest for the first time in months. I care about building something real with someone real. Elena shook her head, backing toward the house. I can't do this right now. I can't think. I need to go. Elena, wait. But she was already running, disappearing into the mansion like she had that night after he'd told her about Brazil. Except this time, she wasn't just processing his past. She was processing him. All of him. The truth of who he was and what he wanted and the impossible situation he'd created. Daniel stood alone in the garden, the confession hanging in the air like smoke, wondering if he'd just lost the best thing that had ever happened to his family. The next 2 days were excruciating. Elena avoided him completely, switching shifts, taking meals in her room, somehow always being in the opposite wing of the mansion whenever Daniel appeared. The twins asked about her constantly, confused by her sudden distance. Where's Ellie? Ella asked for the 3rd time at breakfast. She's busy, sweetheart, Daniel said, his heart aching. She'll see you soon. But he wasn't sure that was true. He'd seen the fear in Elena's eyes, the overwhelm, the way his confession had shattered whatever fragile trust they'd built. Maybe he'd been selfish. Maybe he should have waited, been patient, let things develop naturally instead of exploding everything at once. Or maybe he'd done the only thing he could do, told the truth and hoped love would be enough to bridge the impossible distance between a billionaire and the woman who'd saved his children. Put yourself in Elena's shoes right now. Your employer, a man you thought was a janitor named Pete, just revealed he's actually a billionaire who's been lying to you for weeks. And then, in the same breath, he confessed he's falling in love with you. Would you run? Would you stay? Would you trust him after that level of deception? Or would the power imbalance make everything feel manipulative and wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because Elena's next move will determine everything. Day 3 of Elena's silence felt like suffocation. Daniel found himself in his own bedroom, his actual bedroom, not the staff quarters he'd been using, supposedly cleaning, but really just spiraling. He'd dropped the maintenance disguise completely now, though he still wore simple clothes. Victoria had moved out yesterday after he'd served her with divorce papers, screaming threats about lawyers and settlements and revenge. The house felt simultaneously lighter and emptier. But none of that mattered if Elena wouldn't talk to him. Mr. Westbrook? Mrs. Chin's voice came through his phone. Mrs. Victoria's attorney is calling again about the... Tell them to contact my lawyer, Daniel interrupted. I'm not discussing anything directly. He hung up and stared at his bedroom. This space that was supposed to feel like sanctuary, but just felt like a museum of his failures. The king-sized bed he'd once shared with Caroline. The dresser still holding some of her things he couldn't bring himself to donate. The nightstand drawer he hadn't opened in 2 years because... Daniel froze. The photograph. The one he'd told Elena about. He'd said it was buried somewhere in his room. But the truth was he knew exactly where it was. In the nightstand drawer on Caroline's side of the bed, underneath her favorite book and a letter she'd written him before she died. He hadn't looked at it since the day the DNA results came back confirming the twins were his. But suddenly, desperately, he needed to see it. Needed to connect with that moment in Brazil, that brief relationship that had given him Ella and Noah. Needed to remember that sometimes the most important things in life came from unexpected places. Daniel opened the drawer with shaking hands. The book, the letter, a few pieces of Caroline's jewelry. And underneath it all, a single photograph in a plain white envelope. He pulled it out carefully, as if it might disintegrate at his touch. The image was blurry, taken with an old phone camera from too far away. A woman on a beach in Brazil, her dark hair whipping in the wind, face partially turned toward the ocean. He'd taken it secretly, not wanting to intrude on her moment of peace. She'd seemed so beautiful in her solitude, so lost in thought. Daniel squinted at the details he'd memorized but never fully processed. The curve of her neck, the way she held herself. And there, barely visible even when he knew to look for it, a small crescent-shaped birthmark just below her left ear. Emotions crashed over him in waves. Guilt for a relationship that had created children he'd never known about until they appeared on his doorstep. Longing for the woman who'd given him the greatest gifts of his life and then vanished. Grief for all the questions he'd never get to ask her. Did she ever think about the twins? Did she regret leaving them? Was she even still alive? Daniel. His head snapped up. Elena stood in the bedroom doorway, her hand raised as if she'd just knocked. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined, her posture nervous but resolute. Elena, he breathed, nearly dropping the photograph. I didn't hear you knock. Mrs. Chun said you were up here. She took a breath, steadying herself. I need to talk to you. About what you asked me. About how I feel. Daniel's heart stopped and restarted in the same moment. She'd come. After 3 days of silence, she'd come to give him an answer. Okay, he said, his voice rough. I'm listening. Elena stepped into the room, wringing her hands. I've spent 3 days trying to process everything. Who you are, what you did, why you did it. And I've been angry and confused and overwhelmed. I know. I'm sorry. Let me finish, she interrupted gently. I've been all those things. But I've also been honest with myself for the first time in a long time. About what I want. About what I feel. Daniel's chest tightened with hope and terror in equal measure. The truth is, Elena continued, her voice shaking slightly, I started having feelings for you weeks ago. When you were still Pete, when I thought you were just a maintenance worker who cared about those kids. I tried to ignore it because getting involved with anyone while I'm working here seemed unprofessional and complicated. Elena, and then you told me who you really were, and everything got so much more complicated. The power imbalance, the deception, the fact that you're my employer. She laughed, a sound caught between tears and disbelief. But none of that changed how I felt. And I've realized that what scares me isn't that you lied. It's that I fell in love with you anyway. Both versions of you. Pete and Daniel. The man in the garden and the father upstairs. I fell in love with. Wait, Daniel interrupted, his mind suddenly racing. Before you finish, there's something I need to show you. Something I need you to see and understand before you make any decision about us. Elena's brow furrowed with confusion. What are you talking about? Daniel looked down at the photograph still clutched in his hand, then back at Elena's face. At the woman who'd just said she was falling in love with him. At the future standing in his doorway, waiting for him to choose between letting her speak or showing her his past. And he made a choice that would alter both their futures forever. This, he said, holding up the photograph. This is what I told you about. The picture of the twins' biological mother. The woman from Brazil. I just found it, and I need you to see it. I need you to understand everything about my past, about where Ella and Noah came from, before you tell me how you feel about our future. He held out the photograph without realizing what he was doing. Without seeing the way Elena's face had already begun forming words she'd spent 3 days gathering the courage to say. Without understanding that he was cutting her off at the exact moment she was about to give him everything he'd asked for. Elena's lips had been parted, ready to finish her confession, ready to tell him that despite everything, the lies, the complexity, the impossible situation, she loved him, that she wanted to try, that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real together. But instead, she took the photograph from his outstretched hand, and the world stopped turning. Her face went white. Completely, utterly white, like every drop of blood had drained from her body in an instant. Her hand began trembling so violently that the photograph shook. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. No, that's impossible. Elena? What's wrong? Daniel stepped closer, alarmed. Do you recognize? Her finger traced something on the photograph, the small crescent birthmark barely visible on the woman's neck. I know that birthmark, she breathed, tears already spilling down her cheeks. I've known it my whole life. Daniel's heart began hammering. What are you saying? Elena looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like grief and joy and devastation all mixed together. That's my sister, she whispered. Daniel, that's Sophia. She disappeared in Brazil 4 years ago. I came to America searching for any trace of her, following leads that went nowhere, hoping I'd find something, anything. The photograph slipped from her trembling fingers and floated to the floor between them. Those children, Elena continued, her voice breaking completely. Ella and Noah. They're not just your children. They're my niece and nephew. My blood. My family. The family I thought I'd lost forever. Have you ever interrupted someone without realizing they were about to say something that would change everything? Elena was ready to tell Daniel she loved him. 3 days of processing, 3 days of courage building, and she'd finally come to give him the answer he'd been desperate for. But he cut her off to show her that photograph, and in doing so, he revealed a truth that just made everything infinitely more complicated. Sometimes our timing is everything, and sometimes we interrupt the exact moment that could have been simple and turn it into something impossible. Share your story below. When did your timing change everything? The photograph lay on the floor between them like evidence at a crime scene. Daniel stared at Elena, his mind struggling to process what she'd just said. Your sister, he repeated slowly. That woman is your sister. Sofia. Elena's voice cracked on the name. Sofia Rivera. She went to Brazil 4 years ago on a volunteer program, teaching English, working with communities in Sao Paulo. She was supposed to come home after 6 months, but she never did. Her phone went dead. Her email stopped. She just vanished. Daniel felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. I was in Sao Paulo 4 years ago. That's where I met her. Elena's tears were flowing freely now. You met my sister. You had a relationship with my sister. And those children, Ella and Noah, they're hers. They're Sofia's babies. Oh my God. Daniel's legs felt weak. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. That's why they connected with you so instantly. That's why they call you Ellie. It sounds like Sophia used to call herself when she was little. Sofa. Elena picked up the photograph with trembling hands, staring at it like it held answers to questions she'd been asking for years. I've been searching for her for so long. I came to America 2 years ago following a lead that suggested she'd crossed the border. The trail went cold in Texas, but I kept moving, kept looking. I ended up in Seattle almost by accident. A friend of a friend needed a housekeeper, and I needed work while I figured out my next move. And you ended up here, Daniel whispered. In my house, caring for your sister's children without knowing it. I felt it, Elena said, her voice breaking. From the first day I met them, I felt this connection I couldn't explain. The way Ella laughs, it's exactly like Sophia. The way Noah concentrates when he's drawing. Sophia used to do that same thing, biting her bottom lip. I thought I was seeing ghosts. I thought grief was making me imagine similarities that weren't there. Daniel's mind was racing through every interaction he'd witnessed between Elena and the twins. The instant bond. The way they gravitated toward her. The way she seemed to understand them on a level that went beyond training or experience. It was real, he said. It was blood calling to blood. Biology. They're my family. Elena pressed the photograph to her chest. Daniel, they're the only family I have left. My parents died when I was 19. Sophia was all I had, and when she disappeared, her voice dissolved into sobs. Daniel stood and moved toward her instinctively, then stopped himself, unsure if touch would be welcome given everything between them. Elena, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd had any way to find her. It's not your fault. Elena wiped her eyes with her free hand. You didn't know her name. You had no way to track her down. And her voice caught. She chose to leave them with you. She must have known you'd take care of them. But why? Daniel asked desperately. Why would she leave them? Why wouldn't she tell me she was pregnant? We could have figured something out. I would have helped her, supported her, anything she needed. Elena shook her head slowly. Sophia was proud, fiercely independent. If she was in trouble, if something was wrong, she might have thought leaving them with their father was the only way to keep them safe. She looked up at Daniel, fresh tears streaming. Or maybe she was sick. Maybe she knew she couldn't care for them. Maybe, her voice broke completely. Maybe she's gone, and I've been searching for someone who's already. We don't know that, Daniel interrupted firmly. We don't know what happened to her. But Elena, we have her children. We have Ella and Noah. They're here. They're healthy. They're loved. And now they have you, their aunt. The connection they've been feeling finally makes sense. Elena stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. Wonder mixed with grief, mixed with a dawning realization. That's why I'm here, she whispered. That's why everything led me to Seattle, to your house, to this job. I wasn't searching randomly. I was being led to them. To Sophia's children. To your family, Daniel said softly. To my family, Elena repeated, the words sounding like a prayer. They stood in silence for a moment, both processing the impossible truth. Daniel thought about every moment of the past 6 months. Elena's arrival, the twins' transformation, his growing feelings for her, the photograph he'd been unable to look at for 2 years. Every piece had been moving toward this revelation, this moment where past and present collided and nothing would ever be simple again. Daniel, Elena said quietly, before you showed me this photograph, I came here to tell you something. His heart stuttered. What? I spent 3 days thinking about your confession. About who you are, what you did, how I feel. She took a breath, steadying herself. I came here to tell you that despite everything, the lies, the complexity, the impossible situation, well, isn't this touching? The voice cut through the bedroom like a blade of ice. Both Daniel and Elena whirled toward the door. Victoria stood in the doorway, her phone held high, screen glowing with a recording in progress. Her smile was cold, triumphant, and absolutely vicious. This is better than I could have ever scripted, she said, her voice dripping with malicious satisfaction. My husband, who supposedly went on a business trip, was actually playing dress-up as a janitor to spy on me. And now I find him in his bedroom with the housekeeper, holding some mysterious photograph, both of them crying and declaring their family. Daniel's blood went cold. Victoria, what are you doing here? You moved out yesterday. I came back for some things I forgot. Victoria's smile widened. But instead, I found something so much better. A recording of you two having this deeply personal, incredibly inappropriate moment. Her sister? The twins' mother? Oh, Daniel. This is pure gold. She lowered the phone slightly, her eyes glittering with triumph. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me exactly what I want in the divorce. $50 million, no negotiations, no fighting. Because if you don't, this video goes everywhere. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every business partner you have. You're insane, Daniel breathed. I'm practical. Victoria's gaze shifted to Elena, cruel and calculating. And you, sweet little Elena. You'll be painted as the homewrecker who seduced a married billionaire while pretending to care about his children to get close to his money. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure those children you claim to love are taken away while the courts investigate this whole circus. Elena's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. You recorded a private conversation without consent. That's illegal. Prove it. Victoria shrugged. Besides, by the time lawyers sort out legality, the damage will be done. Your reputations will be destroyed. The twins will be in protective services. And I'll be $50 million richer. What would you do if you discovered your missing sister's children had been in front of you all along? If you'd been caring for them, loving them, feeling that inexplicable connection, and then suddenly realized it wasn't magic or coincidence, but blood and family? How would you even begin to process that level of revelation? Tell me in the comments. Because Elena just found the answer to years of searching, only to have it threatened before she could even begin to understand what it meant. Victoria took a step into the bedroom, her phone still held high like a weapon. The recording continued to play softly. Their voices, their confessions, the revelation about Sophia. Everything captured in perfect clarity. You should see your faces right now, Victoria said, her tone almost conversational. The shock, the horror. It's delicious. How long have you been recording? Daniel demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Long enough. Victoria tilted her head, studying them like specimens under glass. I've suspected Pete wasn't who he claimed to be for over a week now. The way you moved, the way you spoke when you thought no one was listening. I've been married to you for 3 months, Daniel. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize my own husband under a baseball cap and some scruff? Elena's hand tightened around the photograph. So you waited. You let this play out. Of course I waited. Victoria's smile was poisonous. Why interrupt when you were all so beautifully destroying yourselves? I knew if I was patient, I'd get exactly what I needed. And look, I got so much more than I expected. A disguise, a confession of love, and this magnificent twist about her sister being the twins' mother. You couldn't write fiction this good. What do you want? Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. $50 million. Victoria said it casually, as if discussing the weather. Transferred to my account by sunrise. That's approximately 6 hours from now, by the way. Plenty of time to make some calls, move some money around. And if I refuse? Then by breakfast, this video will be on every news site, every social media platform, every gossip blog from here to New York. Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. CNN will lead with billionaire real estate mogul caught in elaborate deception. TMZ will have a field day with secret housekeeper romance revealed. And my favorite, the family court system will have unstable father engages in psychological warfare while pursuing inappropriate relationship with employee. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. You're threatening my children. I'm threatening your custody of your children. Victoria corrected smoothly. There's a difference. See, when this video goes public, Child Protective Services will have questions. Why was a father living in disguise in his own home? What kind of mental state does that suggest? And this woman, she gestured dismissively at Elena, claiming to be the twins' aunt based on a blurry photograph? How convenient. How suspicious. The DNA will prove, Elena started. DNA takes weeks to process, Victoria interrupted. And during those weeks, where do you think Ella and Noah will be? Not here. Not with either of you. They'll be in temporary foster care while investigators determine whether their father is stable and whether their supposed aunt is an opportunistic con artist or a legitimate family member. The words hit Daniel like physical blows. The image of his children, already traumatized by loss and instability, being ripped from their home and placed with strangers was unbearable. You're a monster, he whispered. I'm a realist. Victoria lowered her phone, the recording finally stopping. You wanted to play detective in your own house? Fine. You discovered I'm not the maternal saint you hoped I'd be. Congratulations. But I discovered something much more valuable, leverage. And I'm going to use it. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back with a smile that was pure calculated cruelty. Her sister, though, Victoria said, shaking her head in mock amazement. The missing woman from Brazil who abandoned her babies. And now her sister shows up, conveniently falls in love with the wealthy father, and suddenly they're all one big happy family. The media will eat that narrative alive. Gold-digging sister follows the money trail. I can see the headlines now. Sophia didn't abandon them, Elena said, her voice shaking with fury. Something happened to her. Something that made leaving them the only option she had. Sure, Victoria said dismissively. Whatever helps you sleep at night. But the court of public opinion doesn't care about your theories. They care about optics. And the optics here are terrible for both of you. She stepped into the hallway, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. 50 million by sunrise, Daniel. Or I press send on this video and watch your perfect little world burn. Choose wisely. The sound of her footsteps faded down the stairs and out the front door. A car engine started in the driveway. Then silence. Crushing, suffocating silence that pressed down on Daniel and Elena like a physical weight. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing through options and finding none that didn't end in disaster. Pay Victoria and reward her blackmail? Refuse and risk losing his children during the investigation? Try to fight it legally and watch the media circus destroy their reputations before any court could rule? Daniel. Elena's voice pulled him back to the present. She was still holding Sophia's photograph, tears streaming down her face. What are we going to do? I don't know. The admission felt like failure. I don't know how to fix this. They stood in the wreckage of too many revelations. The photograph between them, Victoria's threats hanging in the air, the sunrise deadline ticking closer with every passing second. And then Daniel remembered. You came here to tell me something, he said hoarsely, turning to face Elena fully. Before I showed you the photograph. Before Victoria appeared. You said you'd spent 3 days thinking about my confession, and you came to tell me how you felt. Elena's breath caught. Daniel, that was before. I need to know. His voice cracked with desperation. Everything is falling apart. Victoria has us trapped. The twins might be taken away. Your sister is missing. Nothing makes sense anymore. But I need to know what you were going to say. I need to know if there's any hope in this mess. Any reason to fight for something instead of just fighting against Victoria. You're asking me this now. Elena's voice rose with emotion. Daniel, we have 6 hours to decide whether to pay $50 million in blackmail or risk losing Ella and Noah. This is not the time. This is exactly the time, Daniel interrupted. Because if I'm going to fight her, if I'm going to risk everything and refuse to pay, I need to know if I'm fighting alone or if you're with me. I need to know what you feel. Please, Elena. What were you going to say? Elena stared at him, the photograph of her sister clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of them. The question hung in the air between them, tangled with the revelation about Sophia, Victoria's threats ticking toward morning like a countdown to destruction, and the impossible choice that would determine whether they'd lose everything or somehow find a way to become the family his children desperately needed. Because nothing would ever be simple again, and they had until sunrise to decide whether love was worth risking everything, or whether Victoria's blackmail would tear apart the fragile connection they'd built before it ever had a chance to become something real. I can't believe I'm leaving you here, but this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Daniel just asked Elena the question that could change everything, but we don't have her answer. Victoria's deadline is ticking down to sunrise. The twins are sleeping upstairs, unaware that their entire world might shatter by morning. And somewhere out there, Sophia's story is still waiting to be uncovered. If you need part 2, and I know you do, you know what to do. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I need to know you're invested in this story before I continue it. And most importantly, comment part 2 below. Don't leave Daniel and Elena hanging in that bedroom with Victoria's ultimatum counting down. Don't leave me wondering if anyone actually cares how this ends. Comment part 2 right now. I need to see it. I need to know you're with me. Because what happens next will determine everything. And I can't tell this story to an empty room.